Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to talk the bigger end of town. We're going to talk about EOI. We're going to talk about tender. When you see this advertised by real estate agents on properties, what does it mean? Stay tuned.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
Michael
Good
Bergio.
morning. Welcome to Morning Minutes. Myself, Michael Bergio, Mark Novak, episode 1460, Tender versus Expressions of Interest. What does it mean, and what type of properties typically use this? Because I find there are certain properties this is great for, and then
Yes.
it's quite oftenly just thrown out there by agents who just don't want to put a price on it and don't know what else to say in the box. So I think it's very important to go through when it should be used, what is it, and some key tips. Because I know over the years, Mark, we've done many expression of interest and tenders, and there's definitely things we do differently after the 10th, 100th time than we did in the first time. And we go, that's golden. We need to always use that. Always have that condition, have that dialogue. But I think maybe first of all, maybe let's go through the definitions. What's the difference between an expression of interest or a tender? A lot of people think they're the same things, but there are some big key differences.
Yep. Auction is auction. We all know auction.
Yeah.
Private treaty is when it's an advertised price. But then you've got this EOI tender process, and it's rare. You don't see it out there much you don't see it out there at all, I guess, for most people. But then when you sort of start getting over sort of 3 or 4 million with commercial industrial properties and development sites, then you start seeing it appear. It's very rare that you'll have an auction on a development site where you get all
Correct.
the developers turning up in the one room. They'll do tender.
Yeah, or expression of interest. So just to run through for anyone watching, an expression of interest is the method of sale typically when instead of just submitting a price like you would in a private treaty, you're basically filling out a form. And each sale is different, but there's basically questions within that form. Price is included, how long your settlement is it 4 weeks, is it 20 weeks? A lot of time they're asking where your finance is coming from. This is very important in a development sale to know if you have finance approval, if it's your own money, because sometimes an owner will choose a buyer who's either an all cash buyer or they've got, say, funding from Commonwealth Bank compared to a lower tier funder or
Yep.
overseas. And
Yep.
typically, the
You
big
don't ask
difference,
that at auction.
no, you don't ask that. There's a big difference between the expression of interest and the tender.
Yeah.
With the tender, you're basically obligated to have the check with your documents, have the signed contract. So it's very similar to an auction where if you're the final highest bidder, you buy the property, the money's there. Expression of interest is a little bit different because there's a lot of times where an owner doesn't want to do auction because they're looking for other terms within the sale. They may be wanting a long settlement. So even if there's two buyers at the same price or one buyer higher, they may pick the lower buyer for the terms within that offer. So an expression of interest is the best method to be able to identify other terms within the offer, which and then the owner can choose.
So I remember we had one in out towards Warriewood where we had 19 tenders submitted on the property, and it was the most in 10 days. So the owners came to us and said, "Oh, we've got an offer of 10.365. Do you think you can get more? We've been dealing with this person for over a year. We're happy to take that. What do you reckon? Here's the person that wants to buy. Can you just deal with them? Happy to pay a commission." We turned around and said, look, I turned around and said, give us 10 days, let us go crazy. with our marketing. Um, 10 days later, 19 tenders. We sat at the conference table in the office with grandma and the grandchildren, and we laid all of these tenders out on the table, 19 of them. And the thing that the tender allowed is it allowed us to get into the undies of every buyer to understand the guts, the stomach, the head, the shoulders, the whole structure of that purchaser. Where you don't get that in the auction, you sort of get this part, the top, what you see, the person. With tender, you got everything else below as well as that. Asking, you're entitled to ask the questions. The buyers don't have to give the prospective tenderers don't have to give the answers, but how they wish to fund it, super important. I think you feel refreshed when you see a big bank on there, as opposed to private lending when you're selling it to someone. You know they're going to fund it easier. A question I love on the tender form is who they are going to use to resell the stock.
Mm.
Now, if you think about the psychology there, you want to make sure the agent's not preferencing the offer maker or the tender maker because they're going to get the listing.
Mm.
So sometimes I see agents shape the deal towards a specific purchaser because they're going to get to sell all the 10 units or the 100 units in the block. And I want to know that when I'm selling, when I'm selling it to someone and I'm the vendor, the seller, I want to know, is that agent going to be selling that stock? I just want to know. Another thing that I love that's in our tenders that we put together is a deadline and a non-commitment, that we will say, when will you be available? If you are the successful and highest tenderer, when will you execute that contract and pay that check? And we're going to hold you to a deadline as well. So when we will hold you to that, and if you don't execute on that desired date, we will queue up a second buyer because there's so much energy in that tender that you don't want to lose that energy.
Yeah, and that's very important, and it's often missed. And I know we didn't have it in our first ones, which we've learnt from. And it's never, no one, it's not of Google, it's never written. I've never seen
No.
anyone else mention this until you get to a scenario where you put so much energy in those 10 days to get as many buyers to that listing as you can. And people make, and that 10 days is like the amalgamation of all your 10 or 30 years in the industry of calling, because you've got prep time. So people may think, well, it's only 10 days, but you've got prep time for a few days that you're calling thousands of people to introduce them that this is going live. Now, you run the campaign, you get the highest offer maker. So the other 18, a lot of their momentum is gone because they know they haven't been the highest. And the big issue, the person who's got the highest, like your normal rule of thumb is to exchange within the 5 days, but 5 days goes past, 10 days go past, and it's sort of like, when can you start talking to the second underbidder to exchange without losing credibility and your integrity as the agent and a part of and the vendor with the sale? Because it's a very small community, that development world, and if word gets around that you're running an EOI, a 10-day campaign, and you don't really follow the campaign, then they're not going to submit tenders, they're not going to bother, and it doesn't work. So it's very important to uphold the integrity of the method. So once 10 days goes past from when the end of the campaign was, if you still haven't exchanged, the second highest bidder may have bought something else, the third may have bought something else. So it's very important to have that. If you have not exchanged, for example, if you have not exchanged within 5 days, we will pursue the second highest offer maker to exchange immediately. So one, from the owner's point of view, you really want that pressure put on the buyer that they could basically lose it without warning, without notice, even though they've had plenty of warning because it's in the document and they're the ones who have been screwing around. So it's not like they're getting blindsided. and obviously you're trying to make a call, but the point of it is to have that deadline in there that gives you the authority to exchange with another purchaser and still uphold the integrity of the sale method moving forward, because we're working for the owner and it's not in the owner's best interest if we just spend a month. I've seen agents spend months after an EOI trying to
Oh,
exchange with that purchaser.
bad,
And a real
bad.
savvy, what a real savvy is probably a polite word to say, developer can and will, and some do, they drag it on as long as they can until they know all the other underbidders are gone, and then they'll reduce their offer. And what
They'll
are you going to
thrash
do?
it.
They'll thrash it. You can't run the EOI again because you go back to those
You can't
underbidders
do it again.
and you can't
Yeah.
say, "Oh, we got slow rolls." They don't believe it because they think, well, if you're an agent representing this type of asset, you shouldn't be getting slow rolled. So something's wrong with the site. We're not interested. So it's very important to have to know this going into an EOI or a tender process.
And how many times we've had that happen, Michael, where what we've done is we've had when we've said, okay, right, you wanted 5 days, you've got 5 days to exchange. We've gone back to the number two tenderer, the second highest tender, and we've said, look, if it's not exchanged in 5 days, we're going to ask you for a signed contract and check. How many times they've actually prepared that signed contract and check out of conviction, that second
Yeah.
buyer, and sometimes even put a little bit more money on top as a surprise. The first buyer doesn't has had the right amount of time that they asked for in their tender, and they didn't perform on executing a signed contract. The second one comes in, it's sold. We have it happen. An experienced agent will run a hard tender process like that. Very rare, but you got to be experienced to run that sort of stuff. And another thing is also an experienced agent will run around sometimes around two or around three in the tender process. So once we for instance that one I was talking about with 19, we will sit with the owner and say, here's our top five, or here's our top three. And the owner goes, yes, we agree with that. The seller goes, yes, yes, we agree with that. And then they say, but I'd really like these terms, or I'd really like this price. And then we'll say, okay, we'll invite these three people into round two and we'll see if we can mold them into your terms, conditions, and prices.
Yeah, and that just and then the vendor's got the best, so much confident that they've got the best price because they've gone back multiple times. It's not just like a one offer and set and forget. It's, as you said, these are because with the tender you get option offers, so it's a lot of the time you rule them out, and then you get some that want a 2 year settlement, rule them out, and then you, as you said, you're left with your best five, and you can really massage that to. And that's the great thing about the EOI or tender. Your owner can tell you what they really want as well. Yes, best price, but a lot of time it's settlement. Sometimes it's they want a property back in the development. Sometimes they want a buyer who's done a development locally because they're going to live across the road and they want to watch a beautiful building being built and they do care about who buys it. So it just allows extra questions being asked and to make sure, because as much as people think the development game is just like raining money, it's a tough business. It's a tough business for the
Tough.
developers. It's tough for the owners selling developments because they get told so much crap, misled, and it's just very tough all round.
Heartbroken.
Yeah, very heartbroken. The amount of times where I've come across where, because a lot of people put developers all in a bucket. Like if there's a development company and they're paying some fresh 18-year-old to knock doors to find out people who own homes, who doesn't know what a unit is to a duplex to a townhome, that homeowner, if that person goes, oh, maybe you could do 5 stories here, where it clearly says in the planning you only can do two, I've seen those owners live with that for decades. I can do 5 stories here. A developer told me, but it's like that's not a developer. Within a company that do developments, they can sometimes there are only one developer who is the developer. The rest are workers who don't have that experience, but
Foot
like
soldiers.
the foot soldiers, and it's a lot of heartbreak for owners that they take that by face value and they just live with it, and it can be. I've seen people who thought they were sitting on a gold mine for retirement realize they're not sitting on anything, and it's
They're not.
tough.
It's sad. But these properties that, like, to give an idea of the value that Tender can add, with that example I gave at the beginning where the owner was happy to trade it at 10,365, gave us the buyer. The actual buyer made a tender. It was one of the 19 tenderers, was probably in the bottom five in terms of their offer. We ended up
Yep.
selling it for $12 million. So we got $1.7 million more than the owner inspected within 2 weeks, 10
Yeah.
days. And I think there was value there. Yes, you do pay your agent, 2%, but I think the value is absolutely enormous that we could run that process. And something I've got to stress also with Tender is the person going to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
So when you're selling to someone, I've seen these development signs fall over because they want maybe a long settlement, or they want they're not funding it or through the big four banks. They don't really have the money, and the owner goes, great, cheering, I sold it on an option on a 2 years, and the buyer never fulfills, and the property falls back in their lap 2 years later. So that whole tender process allows you, and a good agent allows you to compress all of those terms, conditions, and make sure that it's actually the most ideal sale for the seller. It's almost like auctioning on the fly. Imagine
Yeah.
going into an auction showroom, auction room, and then actually stopping the auction and sitting down with the vendor and the buyer, and then starting the auction again and sitting down with another buyer and the same vendor. It's quite unique. It's an on the fly auction in a way. Tender. I love it. I love
And
it.
just almost closing off, because nearly every development site.
We have talked a lot. We did get a bit excited today.
I love the topic. I love developments. I love it all. And especially when there's just a method that no real other agents are implementing. And if they are, definitely not like this with the stages and knowing those questions at the end. But just like a rule, like I've been doing what real estate 15 years. It feels like I'm getting old. Yeah. But the amount of times someone has got a development site and they always say, I've got this developer, I've got this neighbor. I have never had in my long 15 years, I've never had that person buy the property. We've always gotten more money when going to the open market. And
Yeah.
I saw, and it always, it gave me a head spin for many years, but I sort of came to the conclusion that your neighbor's almost the worst buyer for the block because they bought their block so long ago at such a lower price. When they start talking about the new market value, they almost can't comprehend paying for that when they know what they paid for theirs. I see it all the time in commercial leasing, the psychology of it, where I remember selling a building where the tenants were paying $50 a square meter in rent, cheap, hadn't been increased in 20 years. The market was $300 per square meter. The new owner said, we'll just do it to 200, and none of them would agree. And they all hit the roof. They all moved out saying like, it's crazy pricing. And it's because they had a price in their mind that's so much lower. They just can't come to it. And that's like that Warrior one's a perfect example. I remember the auction I did in West Street, Brookvale. Well, three neighbours and they were all out very early. So it's very important to sort of do that expression of interest, do that tender, and put it to the marketplace.
It's always better to sell retail than wholesale when you're the
Yep.
seller.
Can't sell a secret.
No. Good on you, Michael Berger. Guys, hope we helped you out today with the difference of tender, EOI, and what they are in the marketplace. Love ya. See ya. Bye.